down there. And if everybody can give Mark a little hopeful cooling of the weather. What'd you say? It was 95 down there, Mark?
Yeah, it's gotten better today, but it's been warm for October. It is hot. So.
Well, it's Halloween up here, man. We got colors changing, and we're at 54 degrees. It's beautiful.
I love it.
All right. What do you got for us,
my
man?
office because the AC's on.
Yeah. All right. What do you got for us, man? I know I looked over this PowerPoint, man. I love it, and I know you always bring a lot of value to the realtors that show up. So, what do you got for us, man?
Well, this is a continuation of last week, so hopefully some of the folks had been on last week. If not, we're going to continue on the journey through the conversation and an overview of the one thing, the book called The One Thing. And so this quote stands out to me that I read years ago by Carnegie, who knew something about making money, and he says the way to become rich is to put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket. And another famous author, writer, named Mark Twain said it like this. He said, the secret of getting ahead is getting started. The secret of getting started is breaking your complex, overwhelming task into small, manageable tasks and then starting on the first one. So that reads right into what we're going to be talking about as the one thing, continuation of that. We've got a lot to cover, so I'll probably talk a little quicker than last week, but let's get going.
All right, sounds good. Oh,
Did you unfreeze?
There we go. Is that?
Yeah, so one of the things they talk about in the book is what they call the lies, and this one is important. Multitasking, according to Gary Keller, this book is written by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. They call it multitasking is a lie. My experience is a lot of lenders and realtors give me a lot of pushback on this because they think that's part of our function as professionals. But I want to share a few screens on why we don't think that that's a great idea, that you should be single tasking. So in 2000, and my screen is not moving, Scotty.
Is it not moving? Sorry, man. It's really weird.
So this is a great quote. So if doing the most important thing is the most important thing, why would you try to do anything else at the same time?
Right.
When I first did that, I'm thinking that's really something to think about. I mean, and Covey says it like this: the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So you see, the theme is not necessarily brand new. It's been around for a long time, but it's just a good reminder that in order to be successful or to be what Keller calls achieving extraordinary results, takes doing things one thing at a time.
All right, is that working for you, bro?
It doesn't seem to be turning on my end.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Well, I want to give you a little bit of information about a researcher out of Stanford. He was a professor at Stanford named Clifford Nass. And Nass was a communications professor, and he was fascinated by people he thought were multitaskers. And his mission was to find out through study on how well multitaskers actually multitask. And he said, I was sure they had a secret ability, but it turns out that multitaskers are just suckers for irrelevancy, that they're just lousy at everything. So he's a professor at Stanford, so it's not some guy, just working from his home. This guy did a study and said that in studying hundreds of multitaskers, that none of them really performed on a measure or level that you could do if you took things one at a time. So that's just a little bit of scientific around that. In that multitasking, you want to push forward. It's just merely the opportunity to screw up more than one thing at a time. So, in our businesses, we have a lot of things coming at us at one time, a lot of responsibilities, and some of it we can leverage through other people like processors and whatnot or assistants.
Right.
But the question is here to make sure that people understand that, to try to just work on one thing at a time. So on average, science shows that we experience 43 interruptions in an 8-hour day. So that's one every 11 minutes. And we talked about this last week with all the different technologies that we're associated with, between Twitter and Facebook and email and text and all the other things that come at us that we're sort of overwhelmed by information. So we have over 4,000 thoughts a day and one every 14 seconds. So this whole book is around concentration, and I like this statement here that actually didn't come from the book, but it speaks to what we're going to talk about in a minute, that when you break it down to it, life is really just a question. And I heard this quote by Tony Robbins years ago. I was with Tony Robbins in a workshop back in Dallas, 10 years ago, and he said the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of the questions you ask.
No question.
Yeah, I thought, wow, that's a pretty deep statement. And the more I thought about it, the more it's true. And
you know what's funny, man, is going back to this slide right here. When I actually read this, I'm like 43 interruption every 8 hours. I'm like, okay, probably 43 interruptions every minute actually is realistic for most, especially if you have your notifications on your phone, your computer, like everything going off as far as when something comes in. If you have that going off, it could be every minute. You could be 43 a minute. You know what I mean? Like one every second. So I've found that one is people that have all their notifications on, their email, their phone, their everything going off, that they actually have more anxiety and more stress and not a clear level head to be able to think about what they should actually be doing. They're always stressed about what's coming in because they're always reacting to what's coming in. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And even as we're sitting here, I'm at my desk right now, and my phone is off, but I can see it.
Right.
And as it sort of takes my attention away just briefly, because you see it light up a little bit.
Exactly.
And so, there has to be some sort of discipline around focus. And this whole one thing is about focus. And really it's about this idea of asking questions. So going back to what Tony Robbins said, is the quality of your life is directly proportionate to the quality of questions you ask yourself or others for that matter. So Gary Keller puts it like this: ask a great question. Okay, think big and specific in order to find a great answer. And sometimes that great answer is going to be coming from research, modeling, etc., etc. There's hardly anything out there that we can't have access to as far as information. So he puts it like in this pie chart right here. He says there's 4 ways of really asking a question. There's big and small. There's big questions and there's small questions. And there's broad questions and there's specific questions. So as opposed to saying, what can I do to double my sales, which is big and broad, or what can I do to increase sales, which is big, which is broad and small, or even what can I do to increase my sales by 5%? That's going to be small. It's specific, but it's still pretty small.
Right.
What can I do to double my sales in 6 months?
Right.
Okay. So when I was going through this course with these guys months ago, and we started doing some goal setting and planning for the future, what they asked us to do is sort of relative to this chart right here, or this slide, where we set our business goals for the. He says, first of all, do it for the next year, which is make it doable. In other words, do something that's maybe a little bit of stretch, but that you feel pretty comfortable in doing. He said, then what I want you to do is I want you to double that number. So let's say it's $100,000 you want to earn next year. So make it $200,000. And then he says, what I want you to do again is double it again. So in this case, it's $400,000. It could be any number you choose. He said that your possibility goal is really your five-year goal. That's what you want to sort of project over the next 5 years. And he says it's really quite simple. You get to choose the box that you're going to play in. It has to do with time, over time, and your thinking. How big are you thinking? So small outcomes usually are a result of small actions of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and maybe who you're doing it with. And your big outcomes, again, are being around folks, like we talked about last week, Scott, about being around people who want to get on with it. So some of it's what you're going to do, and your strategy on how you're going to do it, and then finally, who you're going to do it with. And once you start talking about those things, your life will definitely change. I mean, your business will definitely change as you change those questions. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, totally makes sense, man.
So now we talk about a little bit about the truth. He says, be careful on how you interpret the world. It is like that. I mean, Ira Keller. And that speaks to that statement we made, last week, that that your paradigm is how you see the world, or how you see your business, or how you see anything in life. And it's really about how, if you want to change your world or change your life, you need to change your paradigm, which is basically how you interpret the world.
Right.
So we're going to journey down this path a little bit. So go back to the previous slide
Oh,
there.
okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. He says so the rest of the book, or really the book, is about this thing he calls the focusing question. And he says there is an art to clearing away the clutter and focusing on what matters the most. It is simple and it's transferable. It just requires the courage to take a different approach. And we're going to talk we've talked a lot about courage, about making changes sometimes gets people out of their comfort zone. But for people who achieve extraordinary things, they're not always comfortable. So let's go to the question itself, and this is really the focus of the book. It's called the one thing. Here's the question. What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So the whole basis of the book is around this. This is sort of our mantra. This is what we talk, when I say we, the guys I've trained with and the people who are familiar with the material, we talk about the one thing in this respect. And so, next slide.
All right.
So we break it down. So part one of the question, what's the one thing I can do? And that sort of tricks the mind a little bit. When you're very specific with your mind, it filters all the things it could do. What's the one thing I can do? So it speaks to, it narrows its focus very quickly, as opposed to saying what I should do or would do. It's what I can do, so what I'm capable of doing. So it's not going to stretch you to where it's impossible. And part two is such that by doing it, let you know that you're going to have to dig deep, because when you do the one thing, something else is going to happen. So if I do this thing, there's going to be a domino effect. We talked about the dominoes last week. It's going to be a domino effect in results. And then part three, where everything else will be easier and necessary, which is really the ultimate leverage test. It tells you that you found the first domino, and that once you start this process of asking the one thing over and over, after you knock down the first domino, the second one comes up. What's the next thing, or the one thing next that I need to be doing?
So
And so my
what you're saying is find the one thing that actually is going to, I don't know, the way I look at it is, what's the one thing that is going to get you to your first sale or first listing or first dollar, really, is what it boils down to. What's the one thing that's
That's
going
right.
to get me to my first dollar, and only focus on that, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And then once you've accomplished that, then your mind allows you to expand itself to look at a bigger picture. But until you knock down the first domino, there's no use in going to the second or third or fifth. So last week we talked about that success is sequential, not simultaneous. Means it doesn't happen all at one time. There's a process. None of the things we've ever accomplished in our life happens all at one time. So my personal aha in this process, we talked a little bit about last week, where I had huge success. I narrowed my concentration to one thing, and where my success varied, my focus had two. And this goes back to, we talked about this a little bit last week, when in the crash of 08 and 09, I decided to become an instructor, and that was my one thing. I taught several times a week all over Austin, title companies, home builders, in my office, wherever I was, and my business exploded. I had one thing that really propelled me to a new place, and once I lost that focus, sometimes business will change. So this is a big aha to me, going back to this theme here.
Right. And if you take into account, I mean, the problem I find is, like, a lot of people, like almost everyone I meet knows what they should be doing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They know what the one thing is, but they let the distractions get in the way. And they the question I always ask is, where do you win games? Do you win games on offense or defense? Like, you always win games on defense, right? You got to play defense, but to win a game, you got to have a good offense and you got to score. So if you're
Right.
not if you're not playing offense and you're always reacting and playing defense to whatever happens to you, it's physically impossible to focus on the one thing.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to that quote from last week. It says, "Don't focus on the problem, focus on the plan." You know, when you put together a business plan, it's not going to go perfectly. But most people, once things go south or go sideways or go wrong, then they either stop or they certainly slow down. But they're focusing on what's not going well as opposed to what's going well. And you use that example last week of marketing to a database.
Right.
And only 3 or 4 or 5% of the people responded to. Well, those are big wins, you know.
Yeah.
So it's about focusing on the plan and not necessarily the problem. And Warren Buffett I read an article about him a while back, and he says, and this is after he's worth $50 billion, 50 years of investing, and he says our investment philosophy borders on lethargy. And I'm thinking, what does he mean by that? So in the article it says that he decided long ago, back in the 50s and early 60s, that he was going to narrow his focus on his investments to just a few companies. And he was going to go big on a few companies as opposed to spread himself too thin. And they say 90% of Warren Buffett's wealth has been made on 10 investments over the years.
Wow. No kidding. Just 10?
Yeah. That's what the article said. And so that speaks to this idea of Pareto's principle, getting the 90-10 rule. 90% of his wealth is from 10 companies. So the one thing book also suggests that we always have to have a big picture. What's our big picture? Meaning at least for 5 years. What's our one thing in the 5 years? And then focusing, what can I do today to get there? And so I've gotten to a point, kind of a habit of mine, after studying this stuff, read the book 5 or 6 times, and trying to implement this process into my daily life. And I find myself, if I don't say it out loud, certainly, I'm thinking to myself, what's the next thing or the one thing I can do now? You know?
Right.
So once you start learning it, it gets in your psyche, and you can't get away from it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So what I like about the book, probably more than anything, really, is from this screen here, and because most of the time,
Mark, going back to this one thing, and the distractions and all that stuff. When you pile this together, and maybe you don't have the right answer to this, but what I've found is when I work with people one on one, and I'm their accountability person. And
yep.
we together determine what the one thing is that they should be doing, calling their past database, whatever it may be, for mortgage bankers or realtors or whoever. Once we figure out what that one thing is, and I say, okay, so if you think calling your past database and just saying hi and using the yellow sticky note strategy and saying, hey, once I say, okay, in the next 2 weeks, can you get me 2 referrals from your past database? So they consciously know that they have to stop what they're doing, they have to turn off the distractions, and they have to physically call their past database to make that happen. And what I guess what I'm saying by saying that is if that's what you need an accountability partner, then you need to find somebody that can say, okay, what is the one thing, and how do I implement this, and how do I stop doing some of the stuff that I do on a normal daily basis and make this happen as the one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you guys play at a pretty high level. I've known you a long time. You guys play this game at what I would call a high level.
Yeah.
And so y'all are about accountability, about getting things done, and this is exactly in line with what you're saying here. So it's really important. We'll talk about that in a little while, having a mentor or coach as well, because it's hard sometimes to do things on your own. Most of us are independents. We don't have partners or certainly don't have a boss or even a manager for that matter. So it's up to us individually to get these things done. But one of the things Keller does in this slide is example is it's not just about business. Your life is in lots of different areas, and he breaks it down into 7 areas. And he starts with your spiritual life. And this is important to me. Gary Keller says that my spiritual life is the most important thing for me, and I can attest to that too. So. But then there's a physical life, your personal life, your key relationships, your job, your business, and finally your finances. So when you talk about the one thing, it's not just about how am I going to make an extra commission or you know set my financial goals. It's about other goals as well.
Yeah.
So it's a little more universal than just talking about sales and marketing. So next slide, or hit.
All right.
And he breaks it down really in two categories. No, go back to the other one.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He draws this line through there that you're on the right side of the chart. Your spiritual life, physical life. That's where where you live. That's your personal life. Your key relationships down toward the bottom are really split into key relationships of family and friends and other friends like that, and also your business relationships. Everything on the left side is around your business. So it's just a nice graphic. I think it flows well for me.
Right.
So a life with purpose. They spend a lot of time talking about your purpose, and there's a book out that I don't know if I mentioned last week. It's a great book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And it's about why are you even here, and Gary Keller calls it purpose, which a lot of writers do. But a life with purpose means we are looking for our highest level of contribution, which basically means the right thing the right way at the right time. So these are fairly deep thoughts. This is not something you sit around over a cup of coffee and figure out. But in all those 7 areas, you're going to have some level of purpose, and I think it's important to spend time around that. And last week we talked a little bit about the BOLD laws, which BOLD stands for Business Objective Life by Design. And they have these, what they call the laws. And he says it's not about building your business. It's about following a schedule. Most entrepreneurs, like myself, we like the freedom of being in business for ourselves, that we're not clocking in 9 to 5 or whatever. But it's really important that we understand that we have to create a schedule in order to build a business. It's not just doesn't come automatically. So we're going to talk a little bit about time blocking and whatnot. This speaks to very consistently what you guys preach, as well as about, in a typical day, your one thing may take, may focus on that, an hour, let's say. Maybe you don't focus on it at all. But for a lot of us, it's maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, which is what is the most productive things I could be doing today. And everything else is the rest of the day. I mean, it could be running errands, it could be talking to your coworkers, it could be going to lunch, it could be doing a lot of things. He says in order to be productive, in that 24 hours, that 40 minutes we talked about last week, you need to spend at least probably half your day on your one thing. Like right now, I don't think I even told you, Scotty, but I'm in the process of finishing up a book I've been working on for a few years. And I don't work on it every day, but when I decide to work on the book, it's 3 or 4 hours out of my day that I'm putting together, on that one thing, because that's going to be important for me to get this thing published next year, and I'm excited about it. So I determined that last year, and that's what I'm doing. So now he wants to talk a little bit about what they call the 3 commitments. And George House, of course, the famous Chicago coach, said he said something. I was going to read it, but you turn. Nobody ever gave his best, regretted it. So in the book, the one thing, Gary talks about 3 commitments that we want to focus on. The number 1 is to what he calls follow the path of mastery. Number 2, move from E to P. We'll talk about that. And then 3, you talked about just a minute ago, Scott, live the accountability cycle.
Okay, cool. Okay.
So follow the path of mastery. So when you see mastery as a path you go down, instead of a destination you arrive at, it starts to feel accessible and attainable. And that's been my experience in this material as I look long term at where I want to take my personal business or other things, but for sure my business. Once you start breaking it down, it does seem accessible, as opposed to, I can't, it's too big. The picture's too big for me to even get at. So when we start breaking it down, it does seem accessible. Mastery is from a book not necessarily from the book, but there's a book called not Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. He talks about the path to mastery is over time people become masters. He uses like an example the Beatles as an example. When they came to the United States in '64, they were an overnight success in the country. But he says that what you don't understand how many they put years into their music prior to getting to the States. You know, in these little hamlets and these little bars in Germany and throughout England. So he says nobody overnight is an overnight success. You have to master your trade.
Yeah, not only that, man, you have to, I mean, like, to master your trade, like, a lot of people think, it's amazing how a couple people will try one thing for, like they'll send one email, and
Right,
they'll go, man, I only had 3 opens, and then, like, oh, that didn't work, and then they'll just never do it again. Where,
right.
man, I mean, here's a perfect example. When I started doing video marketing, I did it for a year straight without zero success.
Uh-huh.
And what I didn't know is I was building marketing equity. So maybe the first time, 2 people seen it. Maybe the second time, 3 people seen it, but one more person seen my first video. 3 months later, I'm getting 50 views because now I'm like kind of building who I was, what I do for a living, that type of thing. So, man, I'm telling you, if you're looking to build a business, people need to know, like, and trust you, and you need
Mm-hmm.
to be persistent. You need to put a plan in place and follow the plan, and know that if you're doing something to build relationships, to build deep relationships and stay in front of people and let people know what you do, you will be
Mm-hmm.
successful. But you can't go, man, I'm gonna send one email and think that just the money's gonna start rolling in, or I'm gonna sign up for Zillow leads or Trulia or Boomtown or all that stuff and go, all right, now all these leads are gonna start flying in and I'm just gonna have all this money. You have to
Right.
put a system in place and a plan in place to follow very strictly, to know that your number one goal is to make a new friend every single day of your life. And I'm telling
I
you,
like that.
once you do that, man, I'm telling you, it's amazing what happens, because that one friend turns into 2 friends, turns into 10 friends, turns into 30 friends, and all of a sudden you got 400 friends
Wow.
going, I love you. Please,
Wow.
please help me buy a mortgage. Please help me buy a home. So it's pretty cool in that respect, if that's your number one focus.
That's a great way of putting it. I've never heard anybody say that your number one goal for the day is to make a new friend. I mean, that's specific, and
Right.
important. I love that. I'm going to write that one down, brother.
Yeah.
But, and it also goes to when I first started teaching, my first couple classes, I didn't even have a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't have any handouts. I just stood up and talked for 3 hours. And so it was well received, but then I got better at presentations. I said, well, what can I do to add more value to my audience? And the same thing with your customers or working with your clients. What can I do to add more value to the experience in order to become their friend deeply?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
The
telling
second part
you.
of this, the second part of this is what Gary calls. We could push it.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
He says moving from E to P, and what that stands for is moving from being an entrepreneur to being on purpose. So he asked this question, which is also a tongue twister. He says, are you doing this simply to do the best you can do, or are you doing this to do the best that can be done? And that's sort of in line with what our conversation is that, there's always another level of mastery that we can obtain or work toward, if nothing else. So it's always looking at your processes, your business, your scripting, your marketing, and say, how can I improve this? Because he says, you can push it. He says, this is a kind of a example of where we all start. When we're brand new, we're starting at zero, and we're all amateurs in whatever it is we do. And because you work hard and you increase your skills, you're still an amateur, but you are increasing your skill level. And then you get to what they call an okay plateau. That life is pretty good. I'm making a decent living. I've got a pretty good business. But then he says, become an expert. You really have to change. And this is what we're talking about, trying to change out of a paradigm or a certain model and really blowing the doors off it. Makes sense? To become an expert or a master at your
Absolutely, man.
business.
Yeah, and here's one. I want to use this one to explain something. So this little line you have here, and this is so true, man. And we found it over and over and over again that the same team that got you to where you are 99.9% of the time is not the same team that is going to get you to the next place. So when you see the amateur, like whoever's with you right now, if you have an assistant or a partner or a team or whatever, typically you're going to have to rebuild, restructure because that team got you to where you're at. But to get you to the next level, it's just a different process, a different system, a different people. And so you
Right.
might have to take a little dip to get to the next spot. And where people fail is once they start to dip a little bit, they're like, oh my God, I'm going backwards. They go back to the safe zone where they were with the same team, and they don't continue where they would eventually get up to the higher curve.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It goes back to that chart a minute ago, thinking big. Sometimes you're going to have to do things differently. You know what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and who you're going to do it with. You know, it could be your team. Certainly, that's going to be a big part of it. But also in the mortgage business, as an example, on what company you work with, are they going to be there to support you in your efforts? You know. So, but you're right. You don't always. You can't get to expert using amateur tools. It's impossible.
Right on.
And I like this next diagram as well, this next visual, if you want to hit it. And this is sort of the same conversation in a little bit different visual, where we started as entrepreneurs. You know, when I got in the mortgage business, I was 25 years old, okay? Straight commission. And I didn't know anything about it. I mean, literally nothing. So I'm cruising along, and he says, all of us have a natural ceiling of achievement. And we're moving along, and we hit that ceiling. Okay, we only know what we know, and then we become disappointed sometimes that you're not moving forward like you want to. And
Right
then
on.
there's resignation. You actually start going backwards emotionally and psychologically. You
Right.
know,
Right.
that maybe there's greener pastures. Like a lot of my friends we talked about last week, they just got out of the mortgage business. They got to number 3 because they said greener pastures. I have to go make a living, so they just quit the business.
Yeah. What I found also, and this is just sad. That people fear success,
Mm-hmm.
and because it's outside their comfort zone, they don't want to take the risk of, oh, what if I fail? Because think about this. This is really powerful. So if I have a dream, okay, and I have a goal that I want to hit, and I keep that dream and I keep that goal alive by never trying to get it, I always have that dream or that goal. But if I go try something that I think is going to help me hit my dream or my goal, and I
Mm-hmm.
fail, now I don't have my goal or my dream anymore.
Uh-huh.
It's almost
That's a good point.
it's almost profound that it's sad that people won't take that leap of faith, and we what we say is jump off the cliff and grow your wings on the way down, to make it happen, because we only get one life. And that's what makes me sad is we get one chance, we get one life, we get one today, one tomorrow, we get the same 24 hours that everybody else gets. Why not live with no regrets and just shoot for the stars?
Yeah. Well, you're right. You're right on the money on that because um, the other thing I heard Robert Kiyosaki say: the only reason that you ever want to achieve a goal is to set a bigger one. You
Correct.
know,
Correct.
so and it could be all different levels for sure. But if we're going to talk about business, I think you're right on what we're trying to discuss here in this one thing. So
Right on.
the next screen basically he says the entrepreneurial approach is doing what comes naturally. You know, when I got in the business in the 80s, there was no technology.
Right.
You actually literally drove around your car and passed out rate sheets and talked to people in the offices. You know,
Yep.
there was nothing sophisticated about it. Nowadays, there's so many ways that we can approach the business. But go to the next screen.
All right.
He says the purposeful approach is doing what comes unnaturally,
Yeah.
and which takes a whole nother look at how you want to move forward in your business. He says number one is to focus on let's say it's teaching. You
Yeah.
know,
Yep.
the education model. Focus on that. Number two is model. There's all sorts of people out there in the world that are doing big things that you can look at and study and model. Number three is create either their systems or your systems that work for you. Number four is, of course, breakthroughs. And the 5 steps to getting purposeful: number 1, focus. Make sure you write down your goals. Focus on the 20%, the Pareto principles. That success list we talked about last week.
Yep.
Number 2 is find strategic options. How can this be done? Are there ways to do it better? And this is what you guys are genius about. You were saying last week that you find better ways where somebody else does your work for you.
Yeah, right on.
And look for models. I mean,
Yeah.
you guys are a model for me. Identify mentors, people, attend trainings, hire coaches, whatever it takes to get you moving toward your goal. Install successful systems, time block, practice scripts, and finally bring in accountability. Measure what you do is huge. How many leads are you producing? How many conversions from those leads are you? Measure, your income, measure your expenses, measure everything.
Yeah.
And again, have an accountability partner to do that with.
Yep.
And that speaks to number 3, which is live the accountability cycle.
Now here's the thing about accountability though. It's one thing to have an accountability partner. It's another thing to have skin in the game. What we found is when somebody has skin in the game, for example, money,
right,
things happen at a drastic pace. For example, Carl and I have done this before. Like he said, okay, Carl, I said, Carl, what do you want to accomplish in 1 month? He says, I want to get this done. Okay, write me a check for $2,000. If you don't get it done, I get to cash the check. Right? you're gonna get it done, right? And you can't be $2. It can't be 200 because
right,
for the average person, that's not enough to make it happen. You got to have it substantial enough to where, man, this is gonna really hurt if I don't do what I say I'm gonna do.
Yep.
So put some skin in the game with your accountability partner and make it real. I've had people write me $5,000 checks before because I called them out on the carpet. I go, I don't believe you're going to do it. And I go, to put your money where your mouth is, write me a check for $5,000. If you don't do it, I get to cash this check and go on a really nice vacation. It's for real, right?
That's for real. Yeah. That's for real. Yeah, that's not one of my slides, but that's a great point, brother. Yeah, you got to have skin in the game.
Yep.
And also, which helps you in this case, it says take complete ownership of the outcomes.
Right.
Because you own things. If you're starting to write checks for $2,000, $3,000, you're going to take better ownership of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. That's for sure. So, keep going. So accountability can come from a mentor or a peer. For your best, you need to have the highest form of accountability as a coach, which is usually a paid position where you're paying somebody on a monthly basis to keep you accountable. You guys work together on setting, your different benchmarks and your measures for what you want to do. You pay them, and of course, you're much more likely to achieve those things.
Right on.
I've got a little bit of both. I've got mentors and I've got some peer friends that are not in the mortgage business, but they own businesses, and we meet, once every couple of weeks as sort of a mastermind. And we're not writing checks to each other, but we do allow each other to speak to our businesses from their perspective, not just being in our world. Does that make sense? In other words, it's not just about the mortgage business. And then finally, we're going to finish up this little part here on what they call the 4 thieves. Focus is a matter of deciding what things you're not going to do. And this right here has probably been the biggest lesson I've had in this process of really deciding on what Greg McEwen in a book called Essentialism calls trade-offs. And there's 4 things that keep you from focus. And next screen. At least as far as Gary Keller, he says the 4 thieves of productivity. First of all, the inability to say no.
Man, that's a big. That is probably the biggest one right there, bro. Like of this whole class, that's so important because our DNA, like as salespeople, we never want to disappoint anybody because we think that it might lead to a sale. So we never want to say no. But when it like what you got to learn to do is go, is this the best use of my time? Is this the number one thing that I should be working on? And can I say no without jeopardizing my family? And jeopardizing your family could mean a lot of different things. You know, like,
Sure.
because if you're taking money, if you're doing something that's not money making activity to provide for your family, that is not a good thing. That's non money making activity. It's actually hurting your family, and you got to think about it that way.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second. But fear of chaos, poor health habits, and that finally your environment doesn't support your goals.
Hmm.
So let's break these down a little bit more. But go to the next slide. The inability to say no. One yes must be defended by over time by 1,000 no's, which is
Amen on that. Yep.
being very, very clear about what it is that you decide to say yes to. And I think you made a good point that as salespeople, we're almost appeasers. We want to make people happy and which is nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, is it going to be congruent? Are your decisions congruent with your larger goal? Getting back to that theme from last week, success is getting what you want. So number one, we have to figure out what it is that we want, and then say yes to the things that are going to be moving us toward that. And I love this quote. Next slide. You there? Anne Lamott says like this. She says, "No is a
Sorry about
complete
that.
sentence." when I read that for the
I
first time,
lost
I
internet.
started cracking.
I think I lost internet for a second.
No problem, no problem. She says, "No is a complete sentence." There's nice ways to say no. You don't have to be rude about it, but but you also don't have to justify yourself either. Fear of chaos. He says, once you start working in the one theme, if you will, and you are focused for several hours a day or whatever on your goals, there could be chaos going on around you a little bit. People are fear of the chaos. They're fearful of missing a phone call or missing an email or returning a text. I mean, there's a certain level of fear about that, which is kind of crazy, but that's where we are psychologically as human beings in our society. So you says you have to get rid of all that distraction. If you're going to sit down and make phone calls to your database for 2 or 3 hours, you can't be, checking your phone every 5 minutes about who texts you. I mean, you know what I'm saying? He calls that chaos. And
Sorry,
then
bro.
number three is poor health habits. Personal energy mismanagement is a silent thief of productivity, which is basically number one. Talks about, and we're not going into detail on this stuff, but talks about number one is getting sleep. He says most of us don't see the bigger value of sleep. He says you need 7 or 8 hours of really good sleep to keep your energy up. In order to accomplish anything, you have to be rested. And there's other things to that, obviously, eating and drinking and whatnot. And number four, finally, your environment doesn't support your goals. So to achieve extraordinary results, the people surrounding you and the physical surroundings must support your goals. And we
Man,
talked about that earlier.
I'm a firm believer, bro, that you are who you hang around. Like,
Yeah,
there's no better way to put that, man.
right,
If you're hanging like because if you're hanging around the water cooler, listening to bad news, and man, the market sucks, and there's just no buyers, and there's multiple offers, and I'd say that's all you're hearing. It
right.
will affect, no matter how positive of a person you are. I'm sorry, but it will affect you in a very, very big way.
In a very short time,
In a
too.
very
I
short
mean,
time too. Yeah.
almost
It's immediate. Yeah.
when you hear something negative in the office about the market, as an example, you sort of feed into it quickly. Your mind sort of shifts to that. Is that really true? You
Right.
know,
Right.
as opposed to staying true to what you know to be your truth. And so this is just a simple little slide that the people that you hang around in the place or where you work have to support your one thing. In other words, going back to we described maybe working for a certain mortgage company, where you work has to support your one thing. In other words, it has to be congruent with your goals and the people there and all the processes that make it your business to work. And so finally, the bold law: your business grows to the extent you do. And this is all about self-improvement and hanging around with the right people.
Yeah, man.
So we're wrapping it up. These are the kind of the big ideas from this section. Again, this is an 8-hour course. We're trying to cram into a couple hours, but the
Yeah,
big ideas from this.
dude, I appreciate you pulling the best stuff out of this because I know it's not easy. I mean, like, guys, Mark took an 8-hour course and he pulled, is the best stuff that he thought would be beneficial for us. So I appreciate you doing that, brother.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things we do within the course, but the big ideas from this maybe kind of what would you have different in your life? You really spend some time around these questions.
Yeah.
What do you feel inspired by, deeply inspired by, and finally, what do you want to go big on? Those are three questions. I just want to leave the audience that hopefully change their paradigm and change their life.
It's funny, dude. I appreciate you being on the call today, but man, I tell you, that is the one. Every time I get a chance to talk to somebody in business, I'm like, man. And here's what you need to ask yourself. You need to write this down. Like if I had to wake up tomorrow morning and have the perfect real estate business, what would that look like? And
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't hold anything back. I would literally go, how big do I want to take this? And you know what? Some people go, hey, I'm good with where I'm at right now. Perfect. Some people go, you know what? I want to double my business. Perfect. Some people go, I want to have a branch with 100 agents. Awesome. So map it out and shoot for, go for it. But
Right.
you have to have a plan to be able to, like, you have to know what that is. Like if you just go, I'm just going to go through life and whatever happens happens, like you're just going to get whatever happens. But if you have a planning, like, it's amazing when you actually write this stuff down,
Mm-hmm.
what actually happens when you actually put a plan in place. It's scary
Right.
because your mind will
Yeah.
take you there, your actions will take you there, your people will take you there. And if the people you're working with don't know your expectations or don't know what your goals, dreams, and desires are, and know what you want to accomplish, it's physically impossible for them to work towards that.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah, you have to have people in the same on the bus with you that go in
absolutely,
the same
man.
direction.
Absolutely. Yep.
And there's a providence. Providence is a spiritual, if you will, perspective, and where you start writing down your goals and you start dreaming big.
Yeah.
There's a quote that says providence moves too. In other words, there's things outside yourself that are supporting that,
Right.
and you see miracles happen. Really,
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well,
it's
man,
love.
Mark, I appreciate it, brother, and thank you so much for being on the call today. Thank you for doing the last 2 weeks, and man, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I know you're busy, and I know you do a lot for realtors. And if anybody's in the Austin area, hey, Mark, do you got any shameless bribe anything you want to talk about? Like, I know you have this course that people are want to purchase, or like if they want more of this type of stuff, is it a 12-week course?
Yeah, we do a teleseminar. It's not just for realtors; it's for business people. Anybody who wants to really go deep with this one thing.
Okay.
It's a 12-week teleseminar, and we meet once a week for about 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
And I have a partner that I work with on it, and there's homework. There's you get a copy of the book, and it breaks down to a great 12-week or approximately 3-month um, you know
The one.
program.
Yeah. How do they? How do
So
how do we share with that? Is there a link that we can send them to, or is there something that I can type in here that?
well, let's see. I don't have the link
Okay.
available just to send out. If they want to contact me, we can do that. Or
Okay. All right.
what are your thoughts are?
Yeah. So let's do this. Give me. Well, how about not an email but a phone number? I'm just gonna, excuse me, not a phone number but an email. What is an email they could
Yeah.
email you at? Uh,
Okay. It's Mark
okay.
dot Hairston HAIRSTON at ulmtg.com.
Okay. So if you guys here, and I'll make this a little darker here for you guys. If you guys want more information about what Mark's talking about today, that didn't work very well. Let me try this again. Let me go there. There we go. And I'll make this bigger. 33%. Let's go 150. Whoops. Holy schmoles. All right. There we go. Shoot, I still didn't do it right. Let me go back to 66. There we go. All right. So Mark.Hairston at ulmtg.com. And
That's right.
yeah, just shoot him an email with that, and then he can get you the link to if you guys would like
Yeah.
more of this, that would be awesome, man. And I appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, we're training on the one thing, and if anybody's interested in learning more, let me know, and we'll get you hooked up because you are the first domino,
All
brother.
right, sweet. I love that, man. I love that. Thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you, man, and love to have you back someday if you want to come back and do some classes with me.
We'll do. Take care.
Thanks so much. Bye bye.
Bye.